Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Oxyco Batian Natural Processed Kenya from Coffea Circulor. And there's a bag right there. And Coffea Circulor, based out of Arendal, Norway. And this coffee was another suggestion to us from our good friend Ramin. So shout outs to and thank you to Ramin for the suggestion. And as the name implies, this one right here is also an isolated Batian variety, which is something we discussed in our Oxyco review, as I'm a big fan of Coffea Circulor's isolation project. I think that there should be more focus on the varieties as opposed to the experimental processing methods. And this coffee was another example of that. As I'd mentioned before, the Ruby Batian last year was one of my favorite coffees of the entire year. And funny enough, this one actually has a slightly higher quality score compared to last year's Ruby Batian. So there's a lot of promise and potential within this coffee. Very much looking forward to discussing it, as this right here is day 31. The recipe we went with for this coffee was really similar to the Oxyco, which is a 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 94 degrees Celsius, so a little warmer, and like this one, best through the V60 as well, which will indicate a more medium fine grind. Coffea Circulor is a Nordic Light for the roast profile. With those things out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 14, first impression. And the cup was coming out a little more robust. And as we mentioned in the Oxyco review, the Ruby Batian last year definitely had that same sort of progress where we needed to get through a couple of days before the coffee really found its footing, as there was not a ton of clarity, and it is mostly skewing on the heavier aspects of the slightly boozy finish, which was of course going to be that first impression. Listed banana feels a little bit more like a rum-like factor, and this is what I kind of came up with. As I've mentioned in previous videos, that when there's this kind of banana rum-like component, it's because rum obviously being a little boozy, fermenty, that's what I'm going to experience when I get a lot of banana from more natural processed coffees, as it definitely has that same sort of fermenty aspect. So it left an okay first impression, but I kind of knew that I was never going to have the best first impression. It was going to take a little work on this coffee. Day 16, first time seeing a fair bit of potential. So unlike the Oxyco, this one I was able to kind of get an idea of what they were going for within the second brew itself, as there is an extra bit of fruit sweetness and a slight herbality, robust still, but on the slightly cleaner side of that boozy aspect, and it's still a little toned down. So that was a somewhat similar experience to the Oxyco. I just wasn't getting the same sort of tropical fruit sweetness that I was experiencing from this cup on this day. Day 18. Not seeing the most ideal results with the higher temperatures, and I don't think that was necessarily surprising, as this one still remains heavy on, well, potential in general, as I couldn't help but feel that at some point I'm going to be able to pull out this wonderful tropical fruit from this cup of coffee. Still herbal, still boozy. So much of it disappears as it cools down, as it becomes significantly more clean, and that was another factor that we'd experienced with the Oxyco. These coffees need a heavy cool down, and once it has cooled down quite a bit, then you're able to get a lot more from the coffee. Day 21, best day of the coffee so far. Once it has cooled down, it does open up in a very bright berry sense, and there's quite a tropical fruit explosion, and that's really nice. So obviously I'm a huge fan of fruit sweetness, and experiencing that in abundance on this day was a great factor. They're in a more tame manner, so I felt like maybe upping the temperature ever so slightly would really help that. So that's what we found, and 94 was something that I really liked. 95 also works better than I think 93 for me. Day 23, a little bit more issues with consistency, as the cup continues to feel slightly on the boozy side. Again, it is opening up when it does cool down, but still getting a little bit more of that booziness. Easy to spot the shift in the dominant components, as this one has the alcoholic aspect to it. And they have a bourbon note listed on here. And when it was suggested to me, this was a little bit of a concern, because obviously I haven't been the biggest fan of the more boozy coffees in general. And I think both this one as well as the Oxyco had them. And I gotta give credit to Coffea Circulor for putting them on there, because truth be told, I don't think I've had a natural processed Kenyan that hasn't had some sort of boozy, fermenty like aspect to it. The Ruby Batian was really nice and clean, but even then I think there was a very subtle aspect of that to that coffee. Day 25. Definitely one of the better days of the coffee, as once it cools down, it's exceptionally tropical fruit forward. So much of that, an explosion in the finish on that coffee. Even more of the bold, robust flavors weren't quite as strong, as it demonstrated just a cleaner cup in general. So I was seeing with time that the cup in general was becoming a lot more clean, as I pretty much settled on this recipe pretty early in this coffee, as I liked to dilute this coffee once again. As mentioned, Coffea Circulor has a 15:1 water to coffee ratio, 93 to 95, and I think that works really well with maybe some of their more clean coffees, but with something like this that's already robust to start with, I think having these higher ratios isn't necessarily ideal for them, and that's why I settled on it for this one as well. Day 29, cup continues to need a little bit of that cool down, but once it does cool down, you're getting a lot of really positive things to it. There's the vintage natural robust red fruit to a cleaner, more delicate red fruit as well. Still dark, very dominant, as it almost has this dark gummy-like flavor to the cup of coffee, and feeling a slight bit of the booze in the cool down as well. To be expected very much. The banana, the bourbon flavor notes listed on there. Yeah, but at the same time, some really wonderful dark fruits as well, and that's going to be the most positive aspect of this coffee for me. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And for level 4s, let's run through those real quick. So the finish, level 4, again, it's not overbearing, and that's been the biggest issue with these natural processed coffees and these experimental coffees in general, as they tend to skew very heavy on the finish. But this actually has a pretty even finish and a great finish, so I'm really liking that right there at the level 4. Sweetness, level 4. Yes, it's a very nice amount of sweetness. So much tropical fruit sweetness. I'm getting a lot of it today as well. As mentioned, it reminds me a little bit of some darker colored gummies in general, but it's just really pleasant, the sweetness. It's not overbearing either, so having both of those at level 4 is off to a positive start. Acidity level 4, once again, natural processed Kenyan from a Nordic roaster, very much to be expected. Berry fruit level 4, definitely the most dominant aspect of this coffee. It's just kind of this darker fruit in general, so I think that they have a some sort of darker plum on here. Definitely could see that, and it would fall into the stone fruit category, which is relatively high as well. But still thinking just in general, there's like a darker grape aspect to it. There's a slight bit of darker like currants as well. Yes, there's a slight bit of tartness to this cup of coffee. And then, as you see right there, the stone fruit is at that level 3 mark. As mentioned, there's this kind of darker plum to this coffee too. Citrus fruit, while I did see so much of this tropical fruit, it wasn't necessarily in the citric fruit categories. It was much more in the stone fruit categories. So that's why there's still a fair bit of it, but not as much as in the Eclosio. And then we have the body at a level 3, which it does have a fair bit of body, definitely to be expected with something like this. And then maybe the most important thing on this tasting wheel, the cleanliness at a level 3. And you're scoring a cleanliness at a level 3 for a natural processed Kenyan, you're doing an amazing job. And that was the big differentiating factor between this coffee and the Eclosio, in addition to the fact that this one was a lot more my flavor profile in terms of taste. I'm definitely going to enjoy this one a lot more than the Eclosio. But for the most part, I quite like the way that this tasting wheel looks. I think it's a pretty nice representation of what I'm getting on this day as well. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I definitely liked it a lot more than the Eclosio, and there are several reasons for that. More cleanliness, of course, more sweetness, and definitely a lot more my type of coffee in general. However, I definitely enjoyed the Ruby Batian a lot more last year, as that one skewed even more in the direction of my flavor profile with those really wonderful bright stone fruits that were the most prominent and pronounced characteristic for me. So while I really like this one and I continue to enjoy the project that Coffea Circulor is working on with these isolated varieties, this one right here, just not quite as enjoyable for me personally as the Ruby Batian. Still think it's on the significantly better end of natural processed Kenyan coffees in general. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to, I feel like if you've really enjoyed those maybe slightly more robust coffees, then this one's a really nice fit for you too, because this one, while it still has that on the early stages, it's definitely much more pleasant on the cool down and the finish, as you're getting a wonderful array of tropical fruits to this cup of coffee. A lot of depth, a lot of complexity. I still feel like if you liked the Ruby Batian last year, then this one's also a pretty nice fit for you. If your main reason for liking the Ruby Batian was the stone fruits, and this one has that in significantly less abundance, so keep that in mind. But other than that, really nice natural processed Kenyan, and I think I'll leave this review at that. If you've by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, we'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Oxyco Batian Natural Processed Kenya from Coffea Circulor. Thank you for watching.